everybody. Today I wanted to discuss a not so common discussion of ego traps when we're working on spiritual or personal development. I feel this is a very important issue to address because these traps themselves can cause a paralysis and stagnation in personal progress. Whether we are actually working through a personal, emotional, or psychological or social issue, a relationship issue, or working through a spiritual practice towards manifestation or co-creation. An ego trap occurs when mentally we sort of do a special kind of somersault to avoid addressing one issue by placating or satiating the needs of another issue in its stead. Now, the ego itself is not inherently bad. The issue with the ego is that most often it is out of balance and it is given too much governance over our ability to live and work and function in our society. Nobody does not have an ego. And when we talk about an ego, we are talking about the id. We're not talking about ego as in egotism. So, when I talk about ego traps, I want to discuss a very important, possibly sensitive, maybe even taboo issue that comes from looking at mental, emotional instability and illness, and how that can often be placated or, again, mistreated in other ways. I'll use myself for an example, okay? I myself do have a chronic issue with obsessive-compulsive disorder that I do actually have to work on all the time. I have to do routine maintenance to keep myself from having, I guess you could say, an outburst of my own OCD tendencies. These things can be difficult to manage if I let them get out of control. Now, how I choose to handle this is a completely different video, but the point is that I do, you know, and when I do have an episodic moment of obsessive-compulsive disorder, intrusive thoughts can come in, and again, part of the work is making sure that I know that this is something that's going on inside me and not the outside world. The most important thing I can do, though, is make sure that I understand that this is something that I have to work on. The issue with the ego trap comes in is that in the beginning of addressing an issue such as obsessive-compulsive disorder, depression, bipolar disorder, maybe even dealing with an abandonment or a trust issue or post-traumatic stress disorder, is that a person is faced with two choices. They can choose to take this on as a personality trait, which can be very damaging and toxic, which is actually the reason for this video, or they can actually treat this as an injury or an illness as they should, the way any person would actually perhaps make a tourniquet for a broken arm, or start changing their diet to curb a blood sugar or perhaps even cholesterol issue that they have within themselves. The reason I'm bringing up ego traps is because one of the biggest ego traps that goes on in mainstream society, no matter what community you're in, is the placating of issues and treating them like personality traits. And this can kind of hurt and really damage and diminish our progress in the pursuit of an ideal career, an ideal relationship, or even actually becoming into a much more full and conscious, aware being. If I were to say my obsessive-compulsive disorder is a part of the package and made that somebody else's responsibility, almost the way I would say my personality and my personal tastes just are somebody else's, priority, that is kind of an ego trap. I've decided to do something else to avoid dealing with the issue that is mine and mine alone. I cannot displace this, and I should not wave it around like a proud flag, because this is not the same as, say, liking spicy food, or having this music on your playlist. These situations are not traits native to an individual, and these are things that do need to be worked on routinely by the self. Make sure that you pay attention to when perhaps a teacher, or a guru, or a mentor, or perhaps even an instructor, a spiritual leader, trying to actually advocate an ego trap. Because this is actually a very big point of corruption within a personal development or spiritual community. The ego itself is such a fragile and busted character, especially by the time we reach adulthood. It wants nothing more than to feel like it is exactly right, that it's absolutely perfect, and that there's nothing it can do about its situation. No ego really enjoys being held responsible for itself, unless it is brought into balance and under control. When the ego takes control of our perception of our mental, emotional, and physical health, it really does cause us to do damaging, self-justified things. Whether it's an eating disorder, physical self-harm, whether it's emotional self-harm, or harm to others. Emotionally, psychologically, doesn't really matter. Pay attention to moments of self-sabotage. Pay attention to moments of sabotage of other people. Pay attention to jealousy. For myself, I would always make sure that I pay attention to when I'm starting to get really anxious about a certain circumstance. Where does my obsessive-compulsive disorder have its unique flavor? For myself, it always comes up around agoraphobia and hypochondriosis. So a preoccupation with my health, especially around disease, as well as an issue with the home or being afraid to leave the home. And I've narrowed it down by doing my own personal work. If I was a complete slave to my ego, I would be on WebMD right now, looking for ways to justify my obsessive-compulsive tendencies, looking for ways to agitate and make sure that I was right about what my paranoia or what my mental health issue was suggesting to me with intrusive thoughts. Or I would be on crime statistic websites, looking to make sure that I was actually right about X, Y, and Z as well. Clearly, that is kind of a problem when you look at our society. How many people are still looking to placate their egos and to actually empower themselves in an ego trap? No, I'm not going to go on WebMD and find out if this mole is X, Y, or Z. I know that in my mind, it's probably the same mole I've had since I was 10, and that there is no reason for me to go down that ego trap cycle, to drive myself crazy. So, what's more important to me? I think keeping that under control is what's more important to me. See, the ego has a very, very, very big problem with itself. Typically, an overarching inferiority complex. We're all born with it. We want to know that we're right, we're on the right path, we're doing the right thing, and that we're adequate. What's more threatening to that kind of personality than the idea that it might be wrong or that it might be sick? What the ego does to prevent itself from being crazy, or thinking it's crazy, and I don't even like using that term, but we'll use that at this point in time. It will work so hard to be right. Have you ever met that person who was so suspicious of, say, her partner cheating, that she would almost rather believe that he really was a cheater than be wrong about how emotionally invested she was in that instance? Have you ever met somebody who was obsessed with how they treated their body according to a Nervosa-style diet, an obsession with the food they put into their body, and to the point where it's actually completely consumed every aspect of their lives? If you put their lives on a pie chart, we don't have balance anymore. The emotional and mental priority goes strictly to that diet. The ego says the only thing that's worse than that is being wrong. So we need to actually bring that ego under control. That's what we need to do. I'm telling you right now, it is the most important thing anybody can do. Because almost the worst thing you can do is feed the ego. You're right, I'm going to do this. I am your slave, don't worry, keep telling me that I am right, and I will find people, I will find things, and people will say and do anything. Talk about the blind leading the blind. You can really find yourself in a situation where everyone is actually, perhaps unconsciously, maybe even consciously, driving each other crazy. So you need to pay attention to that. Where are these circles, these clubs, these groups? Where are these forums? Where are these articles? Where are all these... It doesn't even have to be about health. It could be about politics. It could be about education. It could be about music. It could be about conspiracy theories. God, we all love those. You know, this could be about relationships. How many of these ego masses come together because they all expect and demand conformity? That's what the ego does. To placate itself, because the only thing worse than actually having a problem was being wrong about assuming there was a problem all along. So I ask you not to fall into this ego trap. Catch yourself when you're about to, and get that thing under control. Because none of us need to be a slave to that kind of lower mind.